Hi, I'm James. This video is a brief introduction to early childhood education in rural China. China's economy has gone through a huge growth in the past few decades, and as a result, communities in rural China have lagged behind their urban counterparts in many areas of society. The field of early childhood education, in particular, has been one of the most impacted areas. Today, I'd like to introduce you to the current status of early childhood education, or ECE for short, in rural Chinese provinces and communities, including several key issues, their effects, and the initiatives that are in place to help address these issues. So let's start off with the types of ECE programs that you might see in a rural community. There are two main types of programs, namely preschool classes and village kindergartens. Since the 1980s, preschool classes have been the main type of provisions in rural early childhood education. A preschool class normally provides 1 year of programming to young children about 3 to 4 years old. They're designed in hopes of helping these kids prepare them academically for primary school. And these classes are usually sponsored by village communities. The other main form of ECE is village kindergartens, which allow children ages 3 to 6 to receive education and care services. The development of village kindergartens has been pretty sporadic throughout China, and the quality of these programs can vary a lot by region. So these two forms of ECE in rural China probably look a lot different from what you may be familiar with at home. So for example, ECE programs are often after-school programs held in the same buildings as primary and even secondary schools. And hence, there really are very few places where an early childhood education program has its own dedicated building. So next, I'd like to introduce a few of the many issues that rural ECE programs currently face. And these problems can be placed into three main categories: teacher preparation, funding shortages, and curriculum or teaching style issues. So first, in teacher preparation, the majority of early childhood educators lack formal training or certification in teaching young children. One study, for example, found that less than 12% of teachers majored in or had any training in early childhood education, and that most teachers spend only a small part of their time teaching early learners. It's almost like a small side gig rather than their primary job. And on this slide here, I have a graph that was made from data released by China's Ministry of Education. And we see here that a significantly lower portion of kindergarten teachers in rural provinces up here received their associate's bachelor's degree or above when compared to their urban counterparts. And a significantly higher number of rural teachers here in red completed only high school or below. And so these factors all contribute to poor teacher training, which in turn leads to poor quality education for the children. So in addition to the underpreparation of these teachers, there's also a severe lack in funding resources for rural education services. So what's come about from the system in turn is a reliance on collecting tuition from families in order to pay for things like teacher salaries and other expenses. And so for many rural families, these high tuition fees make sending their children to ECE programs basically unaffordable and not reasonable. And also, rural programs often have student to teacher ratios that are quite large, sometimes upward of 25 to 1, which is significantly higher than the national average of 8 to 1. And another effect of this funding shortage has been the sparsity of ECE services. So one study, for example, found that on average, a given preschool provides child education services for 8 to 9 nearby villages. But in the extreme cases of poorer counties like Zhangjia, Chuan, they have just two preschools. Right here, two preschools serving all 269 villages. And finally, in terms of classroom curriculum and pedagogy or teaching style, some 30% of rural teachers utilize lecture format as their main mode of delivering information to kids. And nearly half of these teachers don't use any form of free play in daily activities. So there were guidelines for kindergarten education and teachers and pedagogy that were released by the Chinese government as early as 2001, but many teachers in rural areas are either unaware of or have yet to really conform to the research-based instructions, and instead they teach however they want to teach. In turn, many teachers, especially those who lack those professional trainings and qualifications we mentioned earlier, are more inclined to use teaching styles that work well for primary students, but not so much for younger kids. So, what are the effects of these issues? Well, virtually every scholar agrees that the current state of early childhood education in rural China is not at all where it needs to be in terms of supporting the developmental and academic needs of rural children. Ultimately, these issues have led to the underpreparation of rural children for primary school, especially in regards to reading and mathematics. So we see in this figure here, where gray represents children in rural provinces who did not attend ECE institutions, and the dark gray represents children who did, we see across the board for children of all ages that those of whom who attended early childhood education programs had higher readiness scores, where this y-axis is a measure of reading and mathematics. So given that these government policies and the current status of ECE has a lot of problems, what's being done about it? Well, here I'd like to illustrate for you one rather successful initiative that was conducted starting in 2011 in Ningxia County in China's Shanxi province. So starting in 2011, early childhood education was provided to parents in the community for free for 3 years, which included waiving tuition fees, improving children's nutrition, and building new facilities. This greatly increased the enrollment rate of ECE, which grew from 53% in 2009 all the way up to 92% in 2013. And program quality improved, and in turn, children's readiness scores. So this endeavor was largely national government funded, which raised some concerns about if it is sustainable or reasonable to support in the long term. Nevertheless, a lot was learned from this program, including the need for local governments to be involved in the implementation and investment of early childhood education programs, and also the great educational and societal benefits that increasing funding for ECE can yield. And these lessons apply not only to these rural provinces and communities, but they're equally relevant in urban areas too. So, to conclude, we discussed here a brief overview on the current state of early childhood education in rural China. This is by no means a comprehensive analysis or anything, but I do hope you learned something and have at least a little bit of a better understanding of the factors and issues and policies and effects that are all relevant to our future generation of kids. That's all I have for today. Thank you for listening. Take care. Bye.